Thank you everybody for joining the session. My name is Lola Pack. I'm the Communications Director at Welcoming America, and I have the honor of presenting this panel titled Messaging, What It Is, What It Isn't, and How to Do It Effectively. First, I just want to give a quick thank you to our sponsors of the Welcoming Interactive, Walmart and Western Union. Just some general housekeeping rules. So enter any questions you have in the chat area. My colleague, Melissa Bertolo at Welcoming America will be able to respond to them. We also encourage all attendees to engage on social media using the hashtag Interactive2021 to share any of your learnings or takeaways. And before we get to asked, yes, this session will be recorded and available to all attendees after the event is concluded. Okay, so without further ado, I just want to present our speakers for this panel, and I have them listed here from left to right in order of appearance. So first would be Hannah Thomas, who is Director of Learning and Innovation at Big Duck, a nonprofit communications agency in New York City. Amanda Cooper, Senior Partner at Lightbox Collaborative. Adam Luna, who is Vice President for Program Strategy and Impact at the Opportunity Agenda. And Suzanne Sierra, who is Senior Program Manager at the St. Louis Mosaic Project. And that is also a Welcoming Network member. Just a brief overview of this session. So each of our speakers will be addressing these topics in this order. And so we'll be going through this throughout the next hour or so. But again, if you have any questions that come up, just go ahead and insert them into the chat. Okay, and now I will kick it over to Hannah for the first segment.
Great, thank you so much, Lola. Super excited to be with you all. Thank you for tuning in to our webinar. So what is messaging? We want to start off our time together by sharing some common ways, getting on the same page of thinking about messaging, what it actually is. And I want to name that the point of view I'm bringing is primarily thinking about how an organization talks about itself. I'm really excited later on that there are ideas from other speakers on the call that get into more specifics about how to talk about an issue area or a solution. I'm starting us off by thinking about, okay, how do we express who we are as an organization? So I bet many of you are familiar with these kind of questions. These are questions that come in from audiences who want to learn about you, want to potentially engage with you, support you. People want to know at a baseline, what do you do? Of course, nonprofits ask for support from folks. Why should I support your organization or your efforts? What are the ways that I can engage in your issue area? How do I get involved and be a part of your work? Other questions might be, what are we aligned on our vision for what the world should be? How are you trying to create this world? What is your vision for the future that's better than what we've got going right now? What achievements are you proud of? What impact have you had? Where is there values alignment between me and this organization? And then who's in your ecosystem? Who's in your orbit? Who makes up your community? And so we really see that messaging can help you have a foundation for answering all of these questions about your organization, about your work, and the ways that you want people to take action with you. And as you can imagine, it would be really great if all of your staff and folks who communicate on behalf of your organization had answers to these questions at their disposal, and that those answers were really cohesive and consistent and really reinforced each other. So at Big Duck, we define messaging as the written and spoken expression an organization uses to spark awareness, allegiance, and or action among audiences. Anytime you are communicating, you are sending a message. And that expression can take the form of, the actual words that you choose. It's also about the way that you frame an issue, frame your role in that issue. And it's also about the stories you tell, the narratives that you create, that you disrupt, that you reinforce. And there's a lot of overlap among all of these pieces. You need language in order to tell a story, for example, in a lot of cases. But so to dig a little bit deeper in terms of sparking awareness, that can be about immigration rights, that can be about immigrant rights, that can be about a policy that would cause harm, that could be about learning more about you as an organization. Allegiance, now as I read it out loud, it sounds a little severe, but I couldn't resist the alliteration of all the A's. But I'm really talking about, growing that relationship with your audience. so that they understand you, trust you, and grow that motivation to support you. And then action, that's prompting folks to actually engage. So now they've heard about that harmful policy, they trust you as an organization that can make change, and they'll be moved to, call their senator or whatever it may be when you ask for their help. Um, Other actions can be donating, following on Instagram, showing up to an event. The list really goes on. So we see many benefits to having messaging for your organization. It's really key to helping you achieve your goals. So it can help your organization tell its story in a consistent, unified way. We often have clients who will interview several staff and just ask the basic, what's your organization all about? What do you do? And you get so many different answers. People are viewing it through their own lens, through the lens of their work. And there's a really great opportunity for everybody to be using that common language and common messaging that helps your audiences really understand you. A good one here is this third bullet point around setting, shifting, or changing perceptions around your organization. So what if you're pivoting your focus? What if you got a new program that's really the heart of your organization now? What if you have a new vibe, a new attitude, a new personality that you want to make sure your audiences think of when they think of you? A messaging can really help you express those things and sort of cement those perceptions in your audience's mind. Particularly in the last year, messaging has proven really valuable in terms of, your capacity to react and respond to things going on in the world. Having that foundation to build upon rather than starting from scratch when you need to respond to a moment, when you need to be a leader, a voice in your community, that's proven really critical. And I've already talked a little bit about audiences, but I really want to drive home that messaging is meant for audiences. It seems a bit obvious, but sometimes it can be really easy to craft your messaging in a vacuum or wordsmith away, not thinking about like how jargony your messaging might be. This has got to be language that meets audiences, that they can understand, that they can translate into action or engagement. And Big Duck recently put out this framework for thinking about audiences. I just wanted to use it here quickly to add that, messaging can and should be targeted based on who your audiences are. You can't be all things to all people. You can't motivate all people to take all actions with you, and that's more than okay. When you're crafting communications, when you're crafting messages, it's helpful to think about who needs to hear this, right? Versus who should, who could, who it'd be great to hear it. Could be endless messages for endless people, but it's better to prioritize, right? Who are the audiences that you uniquely must be reaching with your messaging, and kind of work outward from there. And so these are some of the standard, formal communications and messaging tools that nonprofits use to achieve all these outcomes that we've been talking about, right? Your name is a message. What is the first impression that it gives? What information does it convey? What does it make folks feel? Your tagline sort of accompanies your name and logo as kind of the door opening for audiences and understanding something key about you. Your mission, vision, and value statements, right? The work that you do, the world you're trying to create through that work, and then your guiding philosophies, your guiding beliefs that are through line in the way that you work. Key messages, we kind of see that as like the chapter book story of your organization, right? What's the problem? Why do you exist? What are you trying to solve? What opportunity are you seizing? What's your unique approach? What's the solution that you're bringing to the table? And then, of course, what action can audiences take with you in order to help you advance that mission? And I believe Adam's going to talk through later on in the chat an awesome potential story structure as well. So elevator pitch is like that classic 2-minute quick summary. What's the must know that someone, has to get in learning about your organization? Boilerplate, that about us copy that is so crucial for the bottom of the press releases, or the quick, copy paste context. And then persuasive messaging and campaign messaging, those are pieces that are much more generally dynamic and in flux and targeted. Those are inviting folks to take really time-bound or issue-specific actions. So those are sort of the formal pieces at play. But what I want to hammer home is Messaging is really everywhere. I know I was supposed to mention that what messaging isn't, but I want to instead kind of really suggest that messaging is everywhere. And every time your organization is communicating, it is definitely sending a message. And these are some examples, at play of communications where there's an opportunity to share a message. And I'd love if folks would share in the chat some opportunities that you all see for messaging to play a role in your organization. So here we've got, the tweet you send out, a casual conversation over coffee with your friend when they ask, what do you do? The speech at your annual fundraising gala. What are you trying to drive home? Or what is your ED trying to drive home? Whoever it is that's speaking. The emails that you send, what actions you're asking folks to take there, and partners, right? Thinking about your ecosystem, who you work with, how do they describe you? How do they describe your role? So I'd love to just hear some answers in the chat. No pressure, but good to think about all of the different ways that messaging can show up. Oh, this is a great one. I love this. What's in your email signature? Such an underrated spot, right? That's a really good spot to include some crucial information. And we at Big Duck certainly have a philosophy about what should be there. Thank you for sharing, Sophia. Anyway, if folks want to keep sharing, feel free along the way. I'm sure more ideas will come to everybody as the rest of the speakers talk through more opportunities for messaging. Thank you all.
Thanks so much, Hannah. I also just wanted to mention that we've shared a bunch of links from Big Duck, and we will continue sharing other links based on the content that the speakers are sharing. But that will also provide them in a roundup for all attendees after the session. So don't worry about having to copy and paste or to bookmark any of those. Okay. Well, thanks, Hannah, for that. I'm now going to kick it over to Amanda from Lightbox Collaborative.
Thanks, Lola. Thanks all of you for showing up and giving us part of your afternoon to talk about communications and messaging, which is something I'm really passionate about and that I've devoted my career to. Welcome asked me to talk about positive messaging and what kind of that means and how to do it. And so the way I define it is, I really think positive messaging is powerful. I think it's, I want it should be visionary and respectful and solutions-based, designed to engage people and inspire them and frankly, power them through the long arc of change. Because what those of us have been doing this work for a minute and just paying attention know that change takes time and it takes a lot of energy and a lot of work. And fear or anger or outrage can kind of spark you to action, but to really stay in it for the long haul, you need to have hope and you need to have community and a sense that we're getting somewhere together. And so that's why I think positive messaging is really critical to building and maintaining our power in our movements. But I also want to be clear about what I'm not talking about. And what I'm not talking about is sort of a good vibes only message, right? That's what I call toxic positivity, the sense that we can only talk about good things. No, that's not what I mean. There are lots of bad things happening. We live in heavy, heavy times. We need to name the bad things that are happening. We actually need to name the people who are behaving badly. But we can't just stop there. We can't just talk about the problems. And frankly, I would argue that we shouldn't even start there. I think we can start in a different place that will help us better understand how to make change in the world. So I think of positive messaging, I put together kind of 4 pillars of what I think are sort of the key ingredients in positive messaging. The first is vision, right? A sense of looking forward to something, a sense of where we're headed together. Solutions, the practical answer to how we'll actually make that vision a reality. Coming from a place of strengths, recognizing the strengths in the communities that we're part of or are serving. And then a perspective of abundance, an understanding that there is, and a firm affirmation that there is enough of everything for everyone, and that as we are building a better world, we can do it from that spirit and from that knowledge that we don't have to pick amongst important values and the things that we hold dear. And there will be a little checklist about this at the end, so don't worry about, we'll get back to these so that you can figure out how to incorporate them into your practice. But for a minute, I would like to break them all down a little bit. So let's talk about vision. What I mean when I say vision is that we have to be for things. We can't just be against things. We have to put forward a vision for the world that we want to live in. And, you know, a lot of people will say, oh, conservatives do so much better messaging than we do. And I actually don't subscribe to that belief at all. But I do think when it comes to vision, they have an advantage because conservatives are essentially nostalgic. They're trying to look back. They're trying to think about a world that they think did exist, and they're trying to encourage folks to go back to that world. And it's easier to talk about something that already existed. The world that we're trying to build, the world where people are valued and cared for and resources are shared accordingly, in some ways is science fiction, right? It hasn't existed yet. It's a utopia, and it's a world that is hard for us to imagine, frankly, because we're so far from it. But that's our challenge as communicators, is to create that vision for others so that they can get there with us. And I do think we're getting better at it. One affinity that I have for Welcoming America is that the vision is right there in the name, right? An America which is welcoming. And I love that. You know, Black Lives Matter is a statement that has taken hold, and I think is first and foremost a statement of fact. Black Lives Matter, no question about that. But the statement and putting it out there, it's a challenge to us to do better, to be a better world where Black Lives Matter as they should, and our policies and practices reflect it. And I think defund the police is also a visionary statement. It asks us to imagine a totally different world, a place where safety is done in a different way, in a way that we haven't even really started to imagine, some of us, yet. And I think that's what's challenging about it, is that it's hard to even imagine the world that it's asking for. And yet it is pointing in a direction of greater safety for all of us if we can imagine how we can get there together. So that's why we have to be for things. In particular, I have a great resource if you are curious about how defund and the vision it creates. I would point you to Zach Norris from the Ella Baker Center's books, Defund Fear. He sets forward all of the ways that we could become a caring community and really start to imagine how we could take care of each other and build safety without fear. So and that actually brings up the next idea, which is solutions, right? The truth is we all have problems, and most of your audiences, I'm guessing, are coming to you because they already understand the problems. They believe that there are problems. And yet in our communications, we tend to spend so much energy describing and giving every nuance to the problem. And we don't need to do that. We don't need to give all the airtime to the problem. We need to give the airtime to the solution. And also, people are hungry for solutions. Frankly, without them, we get burnt out and depressed. So the key is to try to describe the problem just enough to set up your solution. And that's actually what I love, and why I think universal basic income has made such amazing progress, far more than I would have guessed in the past 5 years. And I think partially it's because it's set up a problem that, in this simple way, people are poor or experiencing poverty because they don't have enough money. And the solution to that is to give them money. And so then people get money, and then we see the difference it makes in their lives, and we can tell stories about that, and it's amazing and transformative. And by really simplifying the problem, we've created a revolutionary solution that we can talk about more and more and make more interesting. So solutions are key. Anat Shankar-Osorio, who's a communication strategist and researcher, created a podcast called Words to Win By, which I'd point you at. It breaks down a lot of campaigns, how they made a strategy to win and how they put forward and won their solutions. And it's really inspirational. So I'd recommend you check that out if you are interested in more solutions-focused messaging. The third pillar is strengths. And I'm really in here talking about two things. One is what Trabian Shorters, who's a leader in this field, calls asset-based storytelling. And I think this quote sums it up beautifully. You can't lift people up by putting them down, right? When we're talking about people affected by the issues that we are working on, it can't be just about the problems and about the tragedy and what they're facing, because we are also the solution, right? Those of us affected are not just the problems, we're the solutions. We can do it. In fact, we're the only people who can do it. And so we need to make sure that we're creating, that when we talk about people affected in these stories, they're whole people, they're members of their families, they're members of their communities. We're talking about their dreams and their hopes and what they have to offer, and not just what is being taken from them. So I recommend you look into more of Travian Shorter's work if you're
Yes,
interested
do you
in
sell
this.
gift certificates?
And then frankly, just a plug for welcoming and
Okay.
and support that Lightbox did with them is a document we put together a few years ago called Reframing Refugees, which talks about the experience of refugees being mainly the stories being told also about them fleeing and about the bad things that are happening, and trying to pivot that conversation to be about how refugees are contributing and joining their communities. So I'd love to point you at that as well. And the final pillar is around abundance. And without trying to go too far into this, many of you working in the immigration space may be familiar with what's called the fixed pie fallacy, the belief that there is, the belief that is falsely put out that in one of the most common ways that people use that is this idea that immigrants are coming here to take our jobs, right? And that's simply not true as a matter of fact, and it's also not true as a matter of sort of economics. The truth is that when people come and join our economy, they actually build the economy, they make a bigger pie. So if someone comes and joins and gets a job, they're not actually taking that job from me, they're getting a job, but they're also, paying taxes, and they're also buying services, and so they're actually making a bigger pie. Because there's enough pie for all of us, right? And so we know that as immigrant welcomers. But it's important to also understand that this idea of a fixed pie has infected other areas of thought. For example, if you'll remember when we were fighting for marriage equality, occasionally there would be people who say things like, well, what about our marriage? What about my marriage? And you would think, well, what about your marriage? Like, what does this have to do with your straight marriage? But I realized, oh, they think marriage is a fixed pie. Right? They think there's only so much sanctity for the institution or enough participation to go around. And when we start thinking of everything as a fixed pie, which is how people who are hoarding resources want us to think about it, we end up fighting with each other over things that we don't need to fight over. And we do this on our side too. We do this when we talk about funding schools instead of prisons because schools are so much cheaper. Right? That's not why we want to fund schools. We want to fund schools because that's what's better for our community. So that's where the abundance idea comes, because ultimately it's important to remember that our most precious resources are infinite. Love, justice, safety, there's plenty of those to go around. And in fact, the more that people have them, the more that people have them, right? If you want to learn more about this is a little self-referential, but you can watch a video of me talking more about it, which we'll share later. So finally, I want to just give you these ideas of how you can kind of check your messaging for positivity, right? So on the vision question, are you talking about what you're for? Can you imagine a better future? Are you telling us about it? On solutions, do you devote as much space or even more in your messaging to solutions as to problems, right? Strengths, are the people affected controlling their own stories and talking about their whole lives? And are we elevating them as solutions and not problems? And finally, abundance. Are you assuming that there is enough, avoiding false comparisons and demanding we allocate resources according to our values, right? Not according to, deservedness or other problematic assumptions about how we need to do things. So that is powerful, positive messaging. Stay positive, stay powerful, stay in touch. Those are my Twitter handles and the firm's website. I'll drop my email, and if anyone has any questions, or wants more on any of the resources. So just thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for doing what you do. And I hope to be in conversation more. Thanks, Lola.
Thanks, Amanda. And thanks so much for just sharing all those resources in the chat, Melissa. And again, we'll provide these in the roundup after the session. Okay, so moving along, I'm going to kick it over to Adam Luna from the Opportunity Agenda to talk about bridging divides and forming connections with your key audiences through communications.
Awesome. Thanks, Lola. And thanks to all of you at the Welcoming America team. And thanks to my co-panelists, Hannah, Amanda, and Suzanne. My name is Adam Luna. I'm the VP of Programs at the Opportunity Agenda. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm joining you today from Washington, D.C. The Opportunity Agenda is a social justice, narrative, communications, and culture change lab based in New York City. Over the last 15 years, we've done research to unpack communications challenges, and we've trained and worked with thousands of social justice leaders, artists, and cultural strategists across the country. We are about working with leaders like all of you to communicate what you need to win, while also keeping our eyes on the horizon line, the long-range narrative shifts that we all aspire to see. What I'm going to share with you in our short time together is an approach to communicating for long-term change and a formula for communicating with consistency for a variety of audiences. What I'm sharing, of course, is just the top lines, but I hope it will leave you with a concrete tool that you can start using right now to make your own. As advocates, we are all fighting for big changes in the world. And I'm not talking about legislation. I'm talking about the big seismic shifts in thinking and lived experience that we want to impart upon the entire society. And any and all campaigns we work on are critical elements in building that brighter tomorrow that we all want to see. We know that people have all kinds of ideas in their heads about the world around them. If the solutions we're proposing somehow run counter to those ideas, it's going to be really tough to get them to see our point of view, much less take action to make our solutions become real. And on the flip side of that, if a solution we're proposing just seems to kind of fit with their worldview, getting them to hear us and then take action gets a whole lot easier. That's where the idea of narrative comes in. Narrative is what can be described as the big story, rooted in shared values and themes that influence how people process information and make decisions. And those big stories can be multiple, they can run counter to one another, be conflicting, and all be in the same person's head at the exact same time. They're all around us, and they develop how each of us interpret what we believe to be true or false, right or wrong, who we believe might be trustworthy or not. Think about the fixed pie and abundance ideas that Amanda just shared with us. It's that sort of thing that help us to interpret the world around us. They tend to have similar elements. They're more than facts or statements. They tend to have a story or a direction to them. If this happens, then of course that sort of thing then will follow. They tend to have heroes and villains. They're usually they usually imply like a moral to the story, or there's something, there's a lesson to be learned there, or like, oh, I got to remember that for next time. They use similar themes or metaphors, and perhaps most importantly, they're rooted in values. As communicators, we can use values to put people in the right headspace to hear what it is that we want to say. Can we go to the next slide? So I'm going to give you kind of an illustration of how this all works. So this is a mural by LA-based artist Jose Ramirez, done for maternal and child health access. So look at the vibrant community, the activity, the diversity, the prospering people, the color and the beauty. It's an attractive big view of what makes a thriving community. Park, health center, school, workplaces, community stage businesses, just everything. It's kind of what you all do with painting a picture of welcoming communities. It's that big picture. It's a metaphor for the big story. And that's the first tip, is to start with the big picture, the values that we can all see each other in, and kind of get some buy-in, like, oh yeah, I dig that. Like, I would want to help to make that happen. Can we get the next slide? So after you do that, then after you establish a picture of what it is that we're all building over the long run, then you can get specific about the piece of the puzzle we're going to tackle right now. In this example, we may be organizing to create new play places for children, but instead of jumping right into our demands for new slides, you do that second, after having established how the problem fits into the world we all want to live in. The solution you're advocating for is therefore a part of what makes that big story so vibrant and colorful. And in that context, your campaign has urgency that then demands your audience's attention. So what are ways to do this? One way is, or the main way that we would suggest, is to start with values. Could we get the next slide? Research has shown that values are the way that we can most efficiently tap into helpful narratives and open people up to changing unhelpful narratives over the long run. So to help them kind of key into the abundance idea and not necessarily key into first or kind of get blocked by the fixed pie ideas that they have in their head. Values effectively invite and entice audiences to hear messages more effectively than dry facts or emotional rhetoric. Values are important to our identity too. They're not issues. So in this slide, you can kind of see, so we've got like community, safety, equal justice, opportunity. Those are the sorts of things that I'm talking about when I say values. It's not issues and it's not policies. So think about a time, maybe at the last Thanksgiving Zoom or something, when you tried to explain what you do or what you're doing to an aunt or a cousin or family member, and then you kind of get that like glazed over expression in response. As advocates who live and breathe the work, we can tend to really jump right into the law or policy, or even just to name the silo in which we happen to be working that day. But oddly, we know from our research that sharing facts or details like this is actually a surefire way to close minds rather than to open them. But values are what can and do bring us together. They're really the good stuff that get us up in the morning and motivate us to keep on fighting. This promise of a brighter tomorrow is also what can motivate audiences to really hear us out, to get excited about our vision, see their part in it, and the stake that they have in making the vision become reality. And finally, it's what can inspire them to really take action and make it real. We have a handy tool, it's nothing fancy, which can help structure your message to lead with values. Thanks. It's called, creatively enough, VPSA. It's just the first letter of the different words. It can be as simple as something that you just jot down on a napkin before an interview, or as complicated as a big exercise that you do before a campaign with your team to really lay out, like, okay, what's the shared value that we're going to give to everybody? What's the, what are the different options we have for ways to describe the problem, solution, and then the actions? And then you can almost turn it into a root document that you then use for your campaign to craft press releases, speeches, tweets, other communication assets of your campaigns. So let me go through it real quick and then turn it back over. So values here, like I said before, like others have shared, are in the lead. And this is where you list out how you will paint a picture of the big story we all want to be a part of. It's the reason your audience should care, and it's what's at stake unless they take action. So like I said, you all do this in describing welcoming communities. There's a lot of values related words that you and language that you all have tested and are using in campaigns. So that comes at the top. Then comes the problem. And it's important to frame the problem as something that directly frustrates those values that you just mentioned. So that you're putting the problem in the context of this thing that you've just gotten folks to kind of buy into or think like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Well, this problem frustrates those values. And that's why we should care. Next is the solution. So what's the answer? As we've heard already, people respond best to positive solutions, something to do rather than simply something to stop. Of course, there are exceptions, but generally you'll have a better success rate with a positive solution. And try to make your solution systemic rather than individual. What I mean by this is like this. So the guilty verdict for Derek Chauvin is important, but that individual solution will not stop police violence perpetrated against Black people in this country. help people see that systemic solutions are needed because systemic solutions involve them and all of us. And finally, action. Once you've made your case, you lay out what you want the audience to do right now. Be specific, be super clear, and usually, if you can, make it be just one thing, not a list. You'll notice here in this slide that there's percentages by each of these items. So consider them to be like a rule of thumb, of course, not hard and fast rules. Because as advocates who are deep in this stuff, we can sometimes really understate the values and overstate the problems. We feel like we need to tell everyone every aspect of the problem. You need to understand how bad things are. But that can, as we've shared, be a little counterproductive to the to achieving your goal. So using these percentages to just kind of give yourself a sense of how much real estate on the page or in the speech or in the tweet string should be each of these elements. Is your VPSA all problem? Well, do some thinking about what aspect or aspects of the problem will move your primary audience most, and then edit down in your communication to those core elements. Is your action list a mile long? Edit it down to the most critical action step, singular, for that particular audience to take right now. Or on the flip side, are you all values? This could be fine sometimes, but it also might dilute the urgency of taking action right now if you spend too much time there. Now, of course, these aren't hard and fast percentages, but the point here is to be mindful of the balance and which elements you think may move which audiences to action the best. This VPSA can be a grid that you fill out, a formula to make your own. And as we've heard earlier, knowing your primary audience is really important. And using a tool like this can help you communicate the same or similar shared values to all audiences, and then almost like pick from your list of the best points of how to describe the problem, solution, and action for particular audiences. As a campaign tool, it can help you communicate to various audiences in ways that complement rather than conflict with one another. So I know that this was a super speed overview, but I hope it was helpful to you. And I encourage you to visit our website at opportunityagenda.org for additional tools and resources. And there are several message guides in there on different topic areas where we actually break down like a sample VPSA on a variety of issues. But I encourage you to play around with it and work with your teams to brainstorm like, what are the values that we want to communicate to everybody, no matter what? And then, okay, so for this mayor, what problem statement will he most react to? You can alter this for various audiences, but they all lead to the same shared value system, the same big picture that we all want to achieve. That's it for me. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Adam. Yeah, just a final reminder too that we'll take questions at the end. So go ahead and put them in the chat, and then we'll post them to the speakers after our last segment wraps up. So we will be moving on to that. I'll be passing it over to Suzanne Sierra from the St. Louis Mosaic Project for her to talk about engaging in and activating the Belonging Begins With Us campaign in your community, which if you're a Welcoming America member, you may be familiar with, but even if you're not, this presentation will kind of give you a short overview of that. All right, so Suzanne, take it away.
Thanks, Lola, and hello, everyone. I'm Suzanne Sierra. I'm the Senior Program Manager with the St. Louis Mosaic Project, based in St. Louis. We are actually part of the St. Louis Economic Development Partnership, which is the economic development agency for the city and the county of St. Louis. So we function largely as a marketing arm for the region. We're not an immigrant service provider. So that's the hat that I wear here, and I'm excited to be a part of this and appreciate all of my predecessors' comments because it's a wonderful segue to talk about this great campaign that Welcoming America and our other community partners have made available to us. Next slide. Okay, so the National Ad Council, as some of you probably know, was established back in 1942, and it is an organization that was created to really put forth issues and create public service announcements that many of us, have are very familiar with. Smokey the Bear, a mind is a terrible thing to waste. Lots of campaigns like that are part of our, the collective culture of America. And so it's very, very wonderful that Welcoming America and its partners partnered with the National Ad Council to create this. And, it's so interesting because this took years to establish. And here we are in 2021, and who knew how well timed this message of belonging and really healing and reinforcing these important points. Who knew how absolutely relevant it was going to be? And the other great thing about this campaign, which I'll get into in a second, is that it's national for sure, and it's airing on national networks, but there are local connections, and this is where you have the opportunity to really localize it and gives you the tools to activate it. So we're going to now play the spot.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. If you could see you through my eyes instead of your ego, I believe you'd be surprised to see that you've been blind. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Yeah, before you abuse, criticize and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
Okay, so I want to know after this, how many people are going to be left humming that song all day long? Every time I hear this spot, it just sticks with me, and I just love it. And so, why activate this? So we've heard a lot about our values and positive messaging, and this campaign, it fits all of that. The theme of belonging and the fact that it starts with us, it reinforces our mission, right? It reinforces our values. It reinforces what we stand for and what we work for on a daily basis. It also helps build community. It sparks a conversation and it starts empathy. Who can't relate to that feeling of not belonging at some point? When you're starting a new job, when you've moved to a new neighborhood, you've moved to a new country, like our foreign-born population. So it's really something that resonates along so many levels, and it appeals to, again, whether you're LGBTQ, whether you're handicapped, whether you're foreign-born, whether you're, you don't speak like, so many people can really relate to this feeling of feeling, other, right? As John Powell talked about in the beginning. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we have been able to implement this in St. Louis, and just give you some ideas that hopefully you all can build on and take into your market. So next slide. What's wonderful about the fact that we live in this digital world is that it's really easy to share these kinds of campaigns, and Welcoming America really, really makes it easy for us. So you've got the campaign, which is available for TV, for radio. Billboards are also available, as is print material. So there are a lot of different ways that you can share and really get this material into your communities. And with the website, what's really awesome is that you've got, again, this national spot, and then they've taken it local. And what they've done with this website is they reached out to members Welcoming America members and others in all 50 states to come up with individuals who had stories about when did they first feel like they belonged in that particular community. And it's really great. So if you go to the website belongingbeginswithus.org, it will take you to this page. And each of these images, if you hover over it, will give you the story of what that image represents. And so the colored block there, we were very fortunate. Christina Pope, our regional Welcoming America director, reached out last year and she said, can you all recommend a couple of people in your market who you think might have an interesting story, either a first generation or a second generation immigrant? And we put forth several names and we had no idea if the person was going to be chosen or not. So we were ecstatic when the campaign debuted in December to see that the story of a woman in St. Louis who happens to be second generation Puerto Rican. And she referenced this Lotteria game that she helped create and that was really a turning point for her to understand that there were so many other people like her here in St. Louis who at one point or other felt like they didn't belong. And so this website has those stories for a lot of your markets. And if you haven't yet, I encourage you to go out there and find out who in your local markets has been featured. Next slide, because what we were able to do with that is we use that as a story to tell with our local media. And so this is how we activated this campaign. First and foremost, so the campaign debuted and Welcoming America and the Ad Council sent it out to the public service directors or community affairs people at the TV and radio stations. What we did is we created a list of all of those people at each of our stations locally, and we personalized an email and a letter bringing to their attention that these spots were available and encouraging them to air them or to do a media coverage on the story. And again, we had our own local story to share, and so we were able to get some print coverage about Daniela Velasquez being featured in this national campaign. We also, we have, a newsletter that goes out to 3,000 people. We included information about the campaign when it debuted, and we have continued to include it as we talk about, as it related to the unrest and, that we've been experiencing. That gave us another opportunity to talk about being welcoming and making sure that, and here's another way that you can do that. We put it on our social media channels, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. One thing that we were able to do is we have about 17 universities in the region that all have international students, right? So they're coming in here, and if there's one population that we know feels like they don't belong when they first arrive, just because they're from another country, their language, probably isn't very strong with English in many cases. And so we talked to all of the universities and sent them the link to the information. And several of them now are playing it in the cafeterias of the dining halls. They're putting up the posters on campus. They're playing the spots on radio. We're reaching out to our corporate partners to talk to them about using it in staff meetings. It's a good complement to the conversations about DEI that we're having. And everything, all the assets and how-tos and ideas are available on Welcoming America's site. As we know, as we've been hearing from Hannah, Amanda, and Adam, is when it comes to communication and communicating positive messages, it's all about repetition. You can't just tell them once. You have to tell them what you told them, and tell them again. And there are a lot of opportunities to do that. So I'll just wrap up with some screenshots from these toolkits that are available on the Ad Council's website. All the PSAs are available for viewing and downloading. So many tips about how to share the information, graphics. You've got customized press releases for you to use locally. And then again, just tips on how to engage with local media. So, I've scratched the surface. We're going to be doing a lot with hashtags. We're going to be doing a lot in advance of Welcoming Week to get the word out and use this campaign. So, I just want to thank Welcoming America for doing this and making it available, because it's a really good, positive story. It's inspiring and it's healing. And again, it's positive messaging that reinforces what we all stand for. So belonging begins with each one of us. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and reinforce how you can use this in your markets. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Suzanne. And I'll just say on that note about this campaign that, you know, as much as Welcoming America with the American Immigration Council and the Ad Council really led this campaign for, you know, a number of years, that it really comes down to the activation on the ground from not just Welcoming Network members, but just all of our community partners to really do it locally. And we just really appreciate the Ad Council's partnership and just making it super, super easy for communities to do this as well. So thank you for your work at the St. Louis Mosaic Project on that. So now I just want to turn it over to any questions that we received in the chat. And I think there was one earlier for Adam around the VPSA model. So the question being around, is the framework of VPSA strongly evidence-based, or is it more of a hypothesis? Can you speak to that, Adam?
Oh yeah, it's like a coming together of various things that we know from research. So we know that that dwelling on the problem just freaks people out and turns them off. There's just very clear evidence on that. We know that sharing individualized solutions can really tend to just close people's minds to systemic solutions, and can help people. It's sort of like the Kim and Kanye approach to criminal justice reform. It's like, okay, we got these two people out, so like no more reason to be anxious about that. So there's clear evidence about each of the elements, and what we've done is kind of pull them together into this framework. It's not a hard and fast rule about the various percentages, but you can consider it just a general guideline.
Yeah, thanks for speaking to that, Adam. And I think I echo Amanda's thoughts when we just use that VPSA model or in some form of it, like on a day-to-day basis. So absolutely. So I think as we kind of get more questions into the chat or maybe shared individually to either myself or Melissa, I just want to go back and talk to Hannah about messaging at an organization and all the assets that you mentioned with like boilerplates and all those things. I think it's often like, okay, that's like all great and good, but who is responsible for doing this at an organization? So do you mind speaking a little bit on that, Hannah?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it is such a matter of capacity and such a matter of urgency. And right, like we need to get out this tweet. We can't be worried about, what's going to be on our website if they happen to click about us. But what we really find is that it's such a worthwhile investment because when somebody does see that tweet, how are they going to know that they can trust who that tweet is coming from? What do they know about the organization sending it? What kind of relationship have they built up there? So we really find that investing in that foundational language is really essential, and it helps. It's in your back pocket as you're pushing forward these messages that others on the call have been speaking about. In terms of who is in charge of creating this messaging, we find that the best processes are really collaborative and involve community input and community voices and community leadership as well. I did mention in the context of like, you need your messages to connect to audiences, that you can't just make it in a vacuum. It can't just be in your office, in your conference room with 5 folks from your leadership team. It's got to be something where a lot of staff have the opportunity to share their input. You're asking community members what they need to hear, the folks who are closest to your mission, which again, feels like a lot of work and is a lot of investment. But our take at Big Duck is that it's really worthwhile. And then the other piece is that hopefully once you establish some of these foundational pieces, it's more about upkeep and reflection, and folks feeling like they're always wearing sort of like a brand ambassador hat. So it's not like a brand police kind of thing where there's folks who really feel like, it's their job to make sure everybody's staying in line, but just feeling like this message that we're putting out there, it's all of ours. We co-created it, and it's all of our responsibility to make sure that it's feeling alive in our organization.
Thanks, Hannah. Yeah, that's a great point. I think one thing is that people who have, communications like in their titles, can easily be like, well, that's like on them too, but really, it's co-created. So everybody should feel like they're invested equally in it as well. So thanks for that. I had a question come in that is addressed for Hannah, Amanda, or Adam. I lead communications for a social justice human rights org that works on a lot of different issues, and I've been wanting to create guidelines for our communications team to communicate agilely with different audiences around the same issue or campaign. How do we talk about corporate consolidation of farmland, let's say, for example, with a lay donor versus a fired up progressive activist versus a policy wonk who wants nuance? What are your recommendations on how to even start approaching this? So first I'll go to Amanda, then Adam, then Hannah. Amanda, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a lot packed into that question. So I think I'll lift up one thing that we haven't kind of maybe highlighted as specifically, which is really you need to do a process of getting to know your audiences. So you talked about how do we talk to the progressive and how do we talk to the fired up person and how do we talk to, or there were like a list of people. And what I would say is like differently. Like that's the key, right? Is that the ultimate thing is like you're going to talk to each audience a little differently. You can't say something to one audience that if the other audience heard, that would harm your authenticity, right? Like you don't want to be like over here like this and then like talk it, right? But you do need to address the specific audience that you're talking to and speak to their needs, speak to their motivations and their interests. We have a tool that I can share called the Audience Dossier, where we just ask, like, what do they care about? What motivates them? And what are their barriers to wanting to be engaged with you? So, that's one way we do that, is we really just try to get to know those audiences, and we recognize that we're going to need different messages from different audiences. But then within that, we just write a VPSA. That's really what we do. What are the shared values you have with that audience? What is the problem that they've already identified as a problem, right? And then what are the solutions that you guys can work on together?
Thanks, Amanda. Adam, do you have thoughts?
Just ditto on everything that Amanda just shared. Absolutely. The other thing maybe I would just add, not to repeat, is we have an idea that we need that all audiences are equally as important, and so they are different. But as communicators, we really need to think, who is actually our primary audience? And the way that we tend to, one way to do this is, again, you could just like jot down on a notepad, just numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The ones are the people who are absolutely with you. They get it. They're just waiting for you to say like how high to jump, and they're in the air. On the other end of the spectrum are on the 5s. These are the people who are just waiting to be agitated to mobilize against you. And then there's a broad spectrum in between. There's always a spectrum. And decide who is just most important for what it is that you're trying to achieve. It's not always everybody equally. Sometimes for this particular campaign, it's not the ones. It's maybe the turning 3s into 2s. That's like the primary goal. And so work there first, and then the others, you kind of make them so that they're fine and they move in that same direction. But decide who is it that's actually most important, and start there.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam. Hannah, what about you?
Yeah, this is all great, and I appreciate the shout out, Amanda, in the chat about that. Like, target sort of thing, right? Like the must and the should and the could, and like echoing out from there. And if I can introduce yet another framework that we often find helpful, is like this ladder of engagement, right? So at the bottom rung are, and Adam, I think, was just speaking about this, like at the bottom rung are the folks who don't know you yet, but should, and would love you if only they knew. And at the topmost rung are the folks who are your advocates, the folks who are like, jump, how high, I'm into it. And thinking through like, okay, if I want to turn those who are unaware into observers, just they've heard of me before, or they're, you know, I'm in their, you know, orbit. That can be really valuable. That can be a point of prioritization. Instead of thinking about like, we need to reach this audience group, like thinking about like, what is that movement that you're asking them to make up the ladder, and where do you have the resources and capacity to move folks? Maybe you're really invested in social media and that's one of your strengths. So that's going to be in that more lower rungs of the ladder. Maybe that is your priority, one way to set a priority around who the heck you're reaching out of this whole wide world. So just another potential way of thinking about your audiences.
Awesome. Thanks for that. I guess, Suzanne, while we're on the topic of audiences, I'd be curious to know if when you are activating Belonging Begins With Us locally in St. Louis, the kind of audience considerations that you take as well.
Right. So we are, again, our audiences are, because of, you know, how we work with the corporate community a lot. We have ambassador companies. We work with the universities who then provide resources to the students. And then we work with, you know, and then in general, to Adam's point, we're trying to create this vision of belonging. And so that's what's so great about the Belonging Begins With Us campaign, is that it can really fit each of those audiences very easily, if you will, because again, the universities want to be welcoming to their international students. And this shows the students want to go to universities where they know that they are going to be supported and welcome. So that's a natural audience for that. And corporations are also looking more and more, how can we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion? How can we be a preferred employer? How can we show the community as well that this is an important issue for us? I mean, it's a tiny little piece of it, but it helps, again, start that conversation. And then the community, you know, in general, who is still learning about our foreign born, and we know that they want to do more. They want to be welcoming. And so, again, just being able for them to share it on their Facebook pages or to tweet it out gives them the opportunity to say, this is important to me, and I want to, again, activate their own community. So it's very much allows for that grassroots, very viral sharing of this important message. So does that answer your question?
Yes. Yeah. Thanks so much. I just wanted to drill down more into that. Cool. So looking at another question, I think this is for Amanda. Can you talk more about how to combat negative or fear-based approaches and really value positive communications more?
Yeah. Thanks. I think I have kind of two answers to this question. One is that positive stories do perform well. You know, I mean, this is a little bit of a dated reference, but you remember when Upworthy was a joke because it was just so shared? Like Upworthy was all about, you know, amplifying positive stories. And for a moment there, it was just everywhere on the algorithms, and everyone you couldn't avoid Upworthy stories, and people were just sharing them like crazy. And they were all feel-good stories. You know, positive stuff does perform. And actually there's research about fundraising that shows that, you know, strengths-based fundraising works as well, just about on par with the deficit-based fundraising and the poverty porn, frankly, that a lot of people have put into their fundraising for a long time. So it performs fine. But on the one hand, it performs fine. On the other hand, I'm not sure that I care because ultimately, I think part of our jobs as activists is kind of like a doctor, right? First, do no harm. And I think when we put out stories about our communities that are focus on them as agencyless victims of individual harms, we are not creating the world that we want to see, and we're not valuing the people we claim to be wanting to help. And so we have to do the work in the way, I mean, it's the Adrienne Marie Brown. If you haven't read Emergent Strategy, I can't recommend it highly enough. We have to do the work in the way that is the work. And so if you are putting out negative stories about, you just have to do it that way. And the truth is it still works. So even if it works a little less, I don't really care, because you got to think long-term, what's the world we're creating? Who are we truly working for? What are we truly working for? And so you've got to use your values as well. So it performs fine, but also we've got to do what our values demand.
Yeah, absolutely. Just got to stick to who you are and have consistency. So I think this is a question that I think anyone, any four of you can respond to, but in creating video campaigns addressing racism and discrimination, is it suggested to focus on the positive and diversity and inclusion aspects, or especially racism, or sorry, address racism? So any takers?
So the both. I think it just depends on the order in which you choose to share things. Now, there's of course exceptions to every rule. If you want to have an impact of like shock people into thinking something, you might want to really lead with some dramatic something. But in general, the recommendation would be, to sound like a broken record, to start with the vision of what it is that we would all want to see, and the vision of a society where everyone feels safe in their community, where everyone feels welcome, where whatever it is, and then to frame the deficit in making that vision real, but to name it, and to really clearly name it, and not shy away from it, but then present people with, but here's a way out. Here's how we can make that vision real, and here's exactly the piece that you can do right now, whatever that is. That's kind of the rationale of that formula. Of course, there's different reasons to do things in different ways, but that's just generally an architecture that can help engage people in what otherwise would be difficult conversations that might activate to activate that fixed pie idea, to activate a narrative that might just close their minds to anything else that you have to say. The key is, it's almost like with writing an effective email. It can be a beautifully written thing, but if your subject line sucks, then people will just see it in their inbox and just not even open it, in which case they won't even get a chance to read your email. The most important part of an email is the subject line, because it gets people in. It gives you an opportunity to be heard. That's really the main function of this kind of starting with the big picture. Sure, it makes us feel good, but it just opens people's minds to be able to even hear the rest of what it is that you have to say.
Yeah, absolutely. Suzanne?
I was just going to add that, to really just think about, is a video the best way to communicate what it is you ultimately want to communicate? It takes a lot of money. Where are you going to show it? All of that. So I would start with, what is your, what do you want the takeaway to be? And is there maybe a better way to have that conversation? So that's just the other thing. I think sometimes organizations think that you have to spend a lot of money and create a big campaign to affect change, and not necessarily. I remember, and I'm just going to give a quick example, but we work with an organization here. Actually, and this was my pre-Mosaic days when I worked as a PR consultant, but somebody here wanted to, it was like a part of the city, and they wanted to change the negative narrative. And we said, okay, that's going to take time. That's not like a one and done. And in the end, what they ended up doing is buying billboards. And it didn't have the effect they wanted. So I would just challenge you to think about, what ultimately do you want the takeaway to be, and is there a better way to do it, or a more effective long-term sort of tactic?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I often find is, even just within organizations or just working with partners, is that people equate like messaging with like a platform or a certain format of things. And it's, you kind of have to kind of reverse engineer sort of like that thinking to be like, no, it starts with all the things you all just mentioned, with like, your values, your solutions, your actions, just your organization's, mission and vision, and really kind of centering on that, and then building out like products and platforms and the things that where you can kind of disseminate all of that. So that's a great way to think about it, Suzanne. Thank you. Okay, so I know we're coming up on time, but I know there was a lot of information in this presentation, and again, it'll be available to everybody to recap. But I did want to at least ask or give each of our speakers a chance to maybe leave you with, if there was one nugget from their presentation that they would want you to remember about, the role of messaging and stuff, what would it be? So I know this is kind of a surprise question, but I'll pose it to you and see if you can think on your feet, because that's what we do as communicators. So I guess I'll kind of, at least on my screen, start with Amanda, and then go from there on what you would share.
Thanks, Lola. I guess maybe and my dog has something to say about it too. Sorry about that. I guess the thing I would I got kind of that last point I just made about sort of the emergent strategy. I think as a person who's been doing this for a minute, and seen, some wins on some levels and some, real losses and real, we've been gaining, but we've also been losing ground on so many issues, and it can be really hard. And something that helped me kind of stay engaged for the long haul is the idea that I learned from Adrienne Brown in Emergent Strategy, which is that doing the work is doing the work, meaning that the way that we engage with each other, we need to bring our social justice values into all of the work that we do, all of the relationships, all of the efforts, because if we're actually trying to create a more just world by exploiting people, that's not how we get there, right? And so that's kind of the attitude I bring into this positive messaging idea, is like, we have to be an example to ourselves and to everyone of what's possible, of what the world looks like with more love and more justice, and that's the only way we get there, is by doing it ourselves all the time. And so I'd be great if people took that attitude into their communications work and all their welcome. I know welcomers that's part of why you're here, but it really applies to your communications work as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Amanda. Adam, what about you?
So of course there's all the tools and formulas and all that stuff, but I would say that that time invested in developing a clear articulation of the shared values of that big picture is worth it. Any time spent doing that is totally worth it. And they're fun conversations to have. And if you do that with the base of your organization to the executive leadership of your organization equally, then you can have a core direction for your communications that everyone can feel confident in running with in their own kind of as they need to. But it can provide a framework that everyone can just do their thing with, because they've all been a part of creating it. So leading with values, both in terms of the actual structure of a message, but also in terms of your process for developing what it is that you're going to be communicating about, is what I would say.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam. Hannah?
I'm going to say something new. Just having listened through this whole presentation, I can get a sense how this might feel intimidating or overwhelming to try and craft. And so I want to harken back again to Adrienne Marie Brown, Amanda, love emergent strategy. My takeaway would be like, start small. Small is good, small is all. That's one of her ideas. The large is a replication of the small. So just try out, right, a process around developing a message for yourself, and take the time to do that thoughtfully. You don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need to worry about billboards or the chance that you're going to use. Just really work small, work on knowing thyself and knowing thy audiences, I would say.
Awesome. Super. Thanks, Hannah, for that. And lastly, Suzanne.
What a perfect segue for what I talked about. Do a quick email. Belonging begins with us. How are you fostering belonging? Link the website or link the PSA. This is a conversation starter. And literally everything you need to do to activate the campaign is available on the website. Start small, commit to doing one thing a week. So
Amazing.
Just do it. Yep.
Indeed, right? I mean, thinks back to Nike was really onto something before. All right, well, I really just want to thank all of our presenters just like beyond nuggets of wisdom like this. Are just like, I think this is like the anthology of, all good things, communications, nonprofits, and otherwise. So thank you all just for taking time and sharing your expertise with our audience of welcomers, or hopefully soon to be welcomers. On the slide, I just have a couple final reminders. We hope you'll just share your learnings from this session or from the plenaries on social media. Continue to add any feedback to the session in Sched. And also, if you are not a member yet of Welcoming America, but would like to be, here's all the information you need to kind of get that information. We hope you will join us for the virtual, I think there's a musical happy hour or something happening after this. So that's all in Sched and just open to anybody. Invite your friends, turn it on and have a drink, even though it's Wednesday, and enjoy yourselves. So appreciate you all taking the time, and we will see you all again soon. Take care. Bye.